Hey, you. Another early morning. Can't sleep. We at the Philadelphia VA, they're doing a community reconciliation ceremony. They've had, I want to say, 14 cohorts go through over the past 7 years, and they invite community members to come in. Veterans are offered an opportunity to share memories or situations that they consider moral injury. Something that caused in them a moral injury, for them to just get it off their chest in a way. Many of these veterans haven't even shared it with their families, right? But we've gone through 12 weeks or so of coming together, talking about moral injury, talking about what the definition is, that sort of thing, right? Getting them to kind of understand their own sort of moral injury. It's really a fascinating process, but we're reading the textbook on it, okay? It's called "And Then Your Soul Is Gone: Moral Injury in U.S. War Culture." And as much as I agree with the scholarship on a lot of this stuff, there's just some of it that it's overcomplicating it. So much of this, the author is concerned about a culture of war, a culture of war permanence. And because of that, and because we are informed that whatever war we are waging is just and righteous, when American troops kill or otherwise inflict violence, the violence that they inflict is moral. Well, I don't know if Lieutenant Colonel Pryor has read this thing called the U.S. Constitution, but any violence that I inflict, having sworn to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, is supposed to be moral. Otherwise, Congress doesn't declare war, which Congress hasn't done since World War II. So we've got this lengthy discussion. It's so complex. It's such a challenging issue. We just don't know where to begin. Oh my. Only Congress declares war. In fact, any state that declares war, any state that wages war without a congressional declaration is there's bad things that are supposed to happen in that state, spelled out in the Constitution. We're not supposed to be doing these operations. They're just I don't know how they get around the legalese of this. It's not rocket surgery. Here, let me give you an example. Here's where this comes into play. Okay? So, here's an example of what would be a traditional moral injury. Okay? I wasn't even aware. I had forgotten all about this incident. That's how much it disturbed me, obviously, right? Until I was in a theater and Tommy Lee Jones is staring out of the lobby from the poster In the Valley of Elah. And Samar, my ex-wife, and I were just starting to date, and she's like, "Hey, it's something about Iraq, we should go watch it." I was like, "Okay, no big deal." I'm watching it, and I'm like, "Yeah, this movie sucks, it's all heavy-handed." It was just trite. I mean, it was just horrible, right? But then, all of a sudden, the whole premise is that his son can't unburden this burden that he's got. He's carrying this emotional burden, and they're investigating his potentially wrongful death or something like that. It's eerie. And so Jones is continually trying to figure out what it is that is on this cell phone. And before the audience is even really there, and I just realized it was a child. And it was shocking to me. It was out of the blue. I knew what that was. And with that comes an entire memory that ends with, we're hauling ammunition. So the legal orders are, especially if you're hauling ammunition, you don't stop. And this reminded, what brought this to mind is in this book she's talking about by 2010. They were actually training individuals, training them to run over children in vehicle simulators, convoy simulators. Might be something you have to do. Depends on how valuable the load is, you know. If you're extra vulnerable and some kid runs out in front of you, you're not putting the whole convoy at risk just because of some kid. That totally goes against Geneva Convention, totally goes against my moral authority. But it's a reality in war. It's a reality that you just evidently can happen. It's not something you think about until it does happen. Until I'm third or fourth in the line of trucks, I'm hauling ammunition. The truck in front of me, despite being told not to, throws a candy bar out and another one hits the side mirror and drops. And I watch all these children charge. And a boy of about 12 pushes past the others, reaches for the candy, drops on one knee, turns his head. He's looking at the sound of my air horn. A child kneels in the middle of my lane. He's wearing a red shirt. His mouth forms a tiny O. I'm in a semi-truck. I'm in a Freightliner. I stand like a backslash on the brake, doing all I can to stop my truck, putting everyone at risk for this careless kid. I wonder what will happen when I run him over. Will I be pitied? The unlucky driver? Will I be a murderer in my heart? Will my sense of duty to mission be superior to life or death as it should? Will I be able to handle this? This is what's going on in my brain as this child is going disappearing, gone. Freightliner finally stops. The whole thing's been shaking the whole time. I'm like preacher curling the bottom of this steering wheel, standing on the brake, doing all I can. Truck stops. Kid bolts out from underneath, holding the candy bar. And he's just cool. Just slid right between the tires and grabbed the candy bar, took off. And I said some words, and my co-driver, who's a father of 3, called me an effing moon. Almost running that child over. It's a traumatic event that you could have here stateside. It could happen anytime. It could happen to anybody. You know, it sucks. What are you going to do? Seeing for the first time how much you want to run a child over. Because you're sick and tired of all of the things that you can't control. Just adding more and more and more and more and more stress on your plate. And you don't have a target, and you don't have anything to do, nothing you can do. And you are given the legal obligation to keep driving. And I wasn't just holding a Freightliner with a whole 20-foot trailer full of ammunition, 40-foot trailer full of ammunition, whatever it was, 30-foot trailer, I think, probably. I was holding back everything inside of me. Just wanted to just say, forget it. Step on the fuel, run the kid over. Whole convoy just keeps on going. You know, worry about, retaliatory rocket attack or whatever can hit the next convoy tomorrow. Or us when we come back through. I don't care. That's the type of stuff that you're not prepared for, is how driven by circumstance you can be molded into cruelty. And even that comes as a shock when you realize it, right? It's not like that morning I had any desire to run over a child. But it was so beyond my control. Here we are. What do you do, Jason? Well, I should technically probably just drive. War's an ugly business. And I couldn't bring myself to do that here, which I suppose is my saving grace. But the amount of effort I had to fight within myself to make sure I didn't give in to that rage and mash that child, that isn't something you just leave that in Iraq and come back to civilian world and forget that that's a part of you, right? But evidently I did. It's, this was something that it was a couple years later, and I was just like, wow, I forgot all about that. I almost ran that kid over. Like, wow, that was big, So there's your typical moral injury, okay? Another example. We're talking about up armor. I wasn't a fan of up armor. You couldn't really defend yourself. The up armored convoy, you couldn't shoot out of. Up armored trucks, you couldn't shoot back out of, right? So you couldn't look like a aggressive enough target. So you'd usually end up just getting blown up. But on this one, it was the Purple Finger First election, January 2005. There were pictures all over the world of people, civilians, finger up like this, and purple all over their finger. They voted, ooh, we brought democracy to Iraq, all that bullshit. So this is the day that they did that. Or the day before. And all the other routes were dubbed black. As in, there's too much activity, there's already been too many attacks. Nobody else is driving. Except for you guys. Echelon above Corps Unit. The 3rd Infantry Division needed to get in. And so we were rolling them in. So by the time we came into, I think it was Sadr City. Honestly, it might have been Baklava. It was a suburb of Baghdad you didn't want to go into. All right, that's the best way we got it right on the eastern side, going around, and we were coming in, and there were enough roadside bombs and uncovered attacks. Nobody else was able to leave the route. We start jostling with this line of LMTV trucks, light motorized transport vehicles or whatever. So these trucks are a little bit slower than us, and we're hauling their equipment. And instead of just getting out of the way and slowing down and letting us pass and being done, they just jockey back and forth and back and forth. And then we come across a heavy equipment transport line of vehicles hauling tanks in the other southbound lane. So they're slower than both of us, so then we're jostling with them and all this. It was just a mess, it's so easy for things to happen. So easy for people to get lost or convoys to get misdirected, whatever. Thankfully, somehow, we got in just ahead of, instead of bottlenecking, we got in just ahead of the LMTV convoy, right before the city. Burnt husk of cars and scorched rib-like rings from fuel trailers lined the shoulder of the highway for a half mile as we enter Baklava. Typically swarming with civilians this day, the roadway is eerie, desolate. Locked mechanic shops crowd in on either side of the road, oil and grease staining the pavement. A donkey carcass has been stuffed with an improvised explosive device, and its rear is now a mishmash, splattered all across the asphalt. Now that's what I call roadkill, Wester dude says, seated beside me. Shit, car bomb. 24-year-old co-driver points to a white Mercedes sedan propped on a jack on the shoulder of the street. The unattended car has not yet been stripped, so we know it's a bomb. See? There was also one of the rear tires was leaned up against, the tire was removed and it was up on a jack as if it was having trouble. But the tire had been left against the driver's door. So don't open this. These are not the car you're looking for, right? Our convoy has entered the kill zone. I wondered if we will be allowed to pass through or if my day is about to be ruined. If we look like bad enough motherfuckers right now, will they mess with us or they wait for a softer convoy? As we pass the vehicle, my body tenses completely. I hate that part. Hey, I see a man standing back here, rear gun truck calls. Unless he points a weapon at you, the convoy commander says do not engage. And that's a very key point. I didn't know who my enemy was. They didn't wear a uniform. They didn't identify themselves. Congress had not declared war on Iraq. So therefore, I had no legal authority unless I had an identifiable enemy I could not kill. But as long as that enemy maintained elusiveness, they could easily kill me. And you see this every time we have a war that is not declared against an enemy that's not uniformed, right? It's the reason that the Constitution limits when we can go to war, because there are ways in which armies behave so that armed combatants have no real moral injury. It reduces the amount of moral injury they get from avoiding running over children, and they can focus instead on whether or not these are combatants. 22 a day is not rocket surgery. We are being misused. We look then at the fact that we have been misused since the 50s, and we feel kind of frustrated about it. And then we look at the dead people that we know by first name. We think of their families, maybe their daughters. And then we get to live with that for the rest of our lives. And we get to hear your civilians come up to us thanking us. And we get to hear you civilians walking around at parades, talking about your patriotism, how much you love America, blah, blah, blah. And we continue to wage another war. You know, if we can't convince you to send our own men into it, we'll just write a $90 billion check. That'll keep the lobbyists happy that put the politicians into play that send us to war. Moral injury should be a lot more widespread than it is. The only reason that it's not as widespread as it is just the effective PR campaign that the federal government wages to try to convince us that somehow this war is necessary, despite global protests prior to our invasion of Iraq, and the fact that by the time I'm driving down this road at this time in my life, they had already called off the weapons of mass destruction search. Oops, we lied. This is 2005. Our Freightliner reaches a 90-degree right turn to alternate route Detroit. I slow the truck. We roll to a stop. Wester dude orders me to keep moving, asking, "What are you doing?" Yelling, "Willits, let's go." On my side of the truck is a second man standing at the corner, his hands hidden behind his back. My gut tells me this is an ambush, our convoy forced to a crawl while each truck turns at this sharp right. Here's the trigger man, a perfect place for timing an explosion. The other guy had been setting the car bomb up. He was too close to be the one setting it off. Our vulnerable flanks are exposed for a half a mile. A second convoy of hets have bottlenecked behind us. Some soldier is certainly rolling slowly past that white Mercedes. "Show me your hands," I shout. My left forearm carries my rifle up as I turn the wheel. I stop steering when my muzzle is perpendicular with my body. My shoulders tighten to brace the weapon. So I'm in a Freightliner, got my rifle clipped here, resting on the thing, and as I'm turning, you catch the rifle, bring it up. Now you've got rifle, right? You find a place to anchor that hand, and you can lean right up against that door and brace everything right at where you're at. My left forearm carries my rifle up as I turn the wheel. I stop steering when the muzzle is perpendicular. My shoulders tighten to brace the weapon. Get your hands in the air. My right boot breaks. My left tilts against the door. I twist my torso to square up with my target. My right hand caresses my rifle's pistol grip and lifts it, snuggling the buttstock into the pocket of my shoulder. I lower my eye to rest behind the rear aperture, and my nose touches the charging handle. These movements are muscle memory, practically automatic. As I squeeze the brake and our truck stops completely, I can no longer hear my co-driver's barking voice. The smell of basic rifle marksmanship, cleaning, lubricating, protecting oil tickles each slow, methodical inhale. Hands in the fucking air. I show the man my left hand, palm out like a stop gesture outside the cab. I want the peace of mind that I've broken through any language barrier after I've put a bullet in this man's face. I bring my palm back to the steering wheel, forearm supporting the barrel of my rifle. My entire body is solid, anchored to the door, seat, steering wheel, everything balancing my muzzle's position, pointing at this man. Killing him will finally release months of targetless tension and anger. I begin to squeeze the trigger, struggling with the desire for violence. Hands. Now. It isn't a command. It's a plea. Give me a reason. Make me certain. Prove to me your innocence. When my shot blows through your skull, will I be able to explain the threat to JAG or Newsweek? Folks, that is the only thing that I was going through my brain when that moment was happening. the only thing. Will I be able to defend myself to the newspapers? A declared war and a verifiable enemy in a verifiable uniform help prevent my concern of whether or not I'm about to get hemmed up legally for trying to defend my convoy. A second thought comes. Kill this man with one shot. Don't make him suffer. Where to adjust my aim for the less than 10 meters between us to the round dead pans between his eyes. The bullet arrives to the muzzle initially, dropped sight picture low. The rear sight circles the man's face like a halo. A monolithic slab of front sight is silencing the mouth below his mustache. The man's mahogany face doesn't change, it's utterly at peace. He's wearing a turban, a shea green robe, and a dark tunic. You can see humor in his eyes, not fear. And I wonder if he's laughing at the fear he sees in mine. I'm bound by the Geneva Convention to preserve his life unless he shows a direct threat, but by the time he does so, someone along my convoy could be dead. My vision widens to take in the grimy storage shed of market behind him, then the mud brick houses behind those. For what life will I be preserving his? Another bomb? He wants to become a martyr. Send him to his virgins. Another ounce of pressure on my trigger and the rifle will crack. I'm amazed it hadn't already done so. The man's hands seem to glide above his head, empty. His face hints at a smile. Sorry for any misunderstanding. I let the buttstock of my rifle slide down my vest and catch on the carabiner that keeps it on my shoulder, wave and smile before stomping on the fuel pedal and continuing the turn. We hadn't stopped rolling for more than a few seconds. As the crowded chaos of the city's structures scroll into unwinding, desolate desert, Westerdude turns to me, reading messages from the screen mounted between us. Hey, Will, it is. I told you that white car was a V-bed. Just blew up on the convoy behind us. The man could have dropped his remote detonator on the ground before he showed his hands, I think. The other guy was setting it up, too close to the car to be the one setting it off. You had the trigger man in your sights. That was your moment to prove you had what it takes to be a soldier. Another gram of pressure would have done the job. You were too chicken shit to finish. In fact, Westerdude says, I think we may be the only convoy that hasn't been hit today by the look of these messages. Tomorrow's the actual election, I say. Maybe we'll get another chance. I just turned 23. Probably a couple weeks before that happened. Now here I am, 42, and finishing up a master's of theology. My priest asked me, have you ever killed anybody? And I told him no, and for all I know I haven't directly, but I always felt like I should have. And then last week during the moral injury discussion with some of the VA clinicians in Pennsylvania at large, on Zoom they were asking about moral injury and how the treatment plan works in Philadelphia and how we can maybe expand it throughout Pennsylvania, which is a really cool idea. I love the idea, which is why I'm part of this. But one of the providers pointed out to me that if I would have killed that individual, and he was the trigger man, the car bomb wouldn't have gone off. I would have been certain I would have killed an innocent man. I don't know, man. War's tough enough. The founding fathers were correct in making its declaration and its practice such a lofty requirement, or at least they hoped so, I think. It's not supposed to be just something that we just, hey, you know what, let's just go blow up that place. According to the official narrative, a completely ignored threat came home to roost from a bunch of Saudi hijackers. What was I doing in Iraq? Unless it was just simply because those plans had been drawn up a decade prior for Halliburton already. Following the end of Operation Desert Storm in February '91, the Pentagon, led by then Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, paid Halliburton's subsidiary Brown and Root Services over $8.5 million to study the use of private military forces with American soldiers in combat zones. Halliburton crews also helped bring 725 burning oil wells under control in Kuwait. Good on them. In 1995, which would have been right after he got out from being Secretary of Defense and handing them $8.5 million, Cheney received a severance package worth $36 million. As of 2004, he had received $398,548 in deferred compensation from Halliburton while vice president. So he's still getting paid from Halliburton while he's vice president. Awards them a no-bid contract, $7 billion contract, Only Halliburton is allowed to bid on this. And I had 3 or 4 KBR semi-truck third country national drivers, didn't speak English, contracted in between every military truck for every one of my convoys except the ones we hauled ammunition. You can't tell me that Iraq was in any way morally justifiable. And I don't really see what good we did in Afghanistan. That's exactly what I asked the providers last week. I had a panel of 9 of them, all sitting in a nice little Brady Bunch style. What did I gain in Afghanistan? What was the point? What changed? Nobody can give me an answer. What about Iraq? Nobody can give me an answer. That's why we got moral injury, folks. We are misusing our military to go make our politicians rich with the companies that our politicians feed whenever they're bouncing back and forth between the companies and their political office. This is happening all over the place. This isn't just Cheney. This is like the swirl between defense contractor industry and Pentagon is just insane. Like you hit lieutenant colonel and you're out the door as a contractor and then come back as a, it's just, I don't see why we need a giant textbook. I'm glad I'm with the group though, so maybe I can kind of help her, but we can probably slim this down pretty well, right? Pretty simple. Only Congress should be allowed to declare war, and we should not be doing any war until they declare it. And then when people like me who vowed to defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, that's all I vowed. I didn't vow to enrich NATO, I didn't vow to expand NATO, I didn't vow to help the U.S. economy, I didn't vow to make Dick Cheney rich, I didn't vow to fight against terror or anything else that scares America. I vowed to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It's that simple. This is a result of misusing me to do something other than that.